on the markets, not things that the government does, that makes all the difference.
Call
So
Gareth Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora. Rise to take a call on the Government and Treasury's financial review. Mr Chair, in summary, the government's been a poor manager of the economy. In the 2011 year-end budget, what we're seeing is a deficit of over $18 billion, the largest in New Zealand's history. That's poor economic mismanagement. In 2010-2011, Crown debt rose $13.4 billion to over $40 billion. Again, that's poor economic mismanagement. And an economic activity that's stagnating just above the recession technical level, we're seeing again poor economic mismanagement. The mismanagement of the economy is being characterised by poor decisions that have benefited the few but are paid for by the majority. What I want to talk about in this financial review is the narrative of this government, which is we saw tax cuts for the wealthy, which we couldn't afford, which led to a budget deficit, which led to cuts in spending, and now what we're seeing is the third act of this narrative, which is raising revenue by flogging off the state assets. So when you go back to 2010, the tax cuts, what we saw was the big gains being delivered for the wealthiest New Zealanders. We saw the head of Westpac getting $5,000 a week, and what we had to do to respond to that was see increased borrowing for tax cuts to pay for tax cuts which were targeted at the wealthiest. Now that's both reckless and immoral. But in addition to the inequity, what we've also seen, the tax switch, which wasn't fiscally neutral, was a fiscal blunder, another poor case of economic mismanagement. Now, on the expenditure side, what we've seen is this government throwing $2 billion at the motorways per year. Meanwhile, traffic's down, petrol's up, and public transport grows through the roof. We're seeing this government throw $1.2 billion annually at polluters in New Zealand through their amended emissions trading scheme. We're seeing this government sell our assets to fund a $400 million irrigation. Again, what we're seeing under this government is they say they don't pick winners, but when it comes to irrigation, they're surely picking winners. When it comes to Sky City, they're picking winners. When it comes to Warners, they're picking winners. And what we're seeing is we're picking winners in the old-style economy, which has harmful social and harmful economic impacts on our country. But on the revenue side, this is where the government has failed to make up the books, to balance the books. It's requiring the third act in this narrative, which is to flog off the state assets. The government turned down the Green Party's sensible and popular proposal for a temporary earthquake levy for Christchurch. That could have raised over $1 billion per annum, which would have helped, Mr Chair, with the $9 billion cost of Treasury estimates will be projected to be spent by the taxpayer. So rather than putting the cost of the earthquake on the taxpayer's credit card, we could have shared the cost more fairly across all New Zealanders and not put the burden again on the many. A comprehensive tax on capital gains that wouldn't have affected the family home. The tax working group predicted could have brought in $4.5 billion in it a year and would have helped move our economy to a more productive footing. Charge on commercial water use would have raised $500 million a year. But instead of taking these smart common sense alternatives, this government, because they've got tax cuts for the rich, because they've got a budget blow-up, because they're borrowing too much money, now they've got to sell the assets. The problem is, though, when it comes to selling the assets, the economics don't even stack up there. So our energy assets are getting a very good return at the moment, in fact more than the cost of repaying the debt is costing at the moment. So the Treasury's Budget Policy Statement 2012 quantifies this amount. It shows the government, if it proceeds with a partial privatisation, will cost $94 million a year. So selling assets to reduce debt costs the government money. And that's the key message we've got to take to the country to stop this mindless selling of assets and the mindless arguments justifying it. So, Mr Chair, the conclusion is when you've got this destructive narrative affecting our economy, we need to get into a good story. The good news is there's a hero in the story. It's a smart, clean economy. This is what we can deliver, which is going to lift our kids out of poverty. It's going to see actual work coming to New Zealand. Take the drill it, mine it approach this government's got to economic development, the resource sector. There's hardly any jobs for Kiwis, hardly any royalties, because we've got one of the fourth lowest royalty rates in the world. hardly any tax income because we've got so many tax exemptions, but what we're seeing is the profits go offshore. If we were investing in sustainable clean energy, if we were driving export growth through our international champions, these state-owned energy assets that are at the moment selling our expertise on geothermal around the world, we could be delivering prosperity for Kiwis, we could be growing the economy so we can lift those Kiwis out of poverty, actually get our kids a good start in the future, and that's the path the Green Party will be focusing on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call David Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.